name in the legislation. And this is it. At least this is what they thought it looked like as they put the pieces together and how different pieces of this related to each other. And this is the organization that will stand between my constituents and their doctor. This is the organization that will say, if you're sick and you want to go to a doctor or you want to go to a hospital, this is the organization that will decide whether that is permissible and then what the doctor may or may not be able to do. At least this is our understanding. But the Franking Board, the organization that determines whether we can make copies of this and send this out to our constituents, has decided that this is inappropriate to send to our constituents because they say it's inaccurate. So now the Democrats here in the House are starting to control what members of Congress can send back to their constituents when their constituents ask for information. The interesting thing is, as we talk about this, we may ask and say, well, if this chart isn't right, could you lay out for us the chart that is more accurate and the chart that you would use to explain to your constituents exactly how this process would work? We are still waiting for that chart. The other thing that we found out that was kind of interesting is that the Speaker has also determined, or it appears that the Speaker's office has determined, that it is inappropriate to say government-run health care. So even though we're putting an organization in place like this to manage the health care system in America, something that the Congressional Budget Office says will add about $1 trillion to our debt over the next 10 years, even though we're creating all of these different agencies, it is inappropriate to tell our constituents that this is government-run health care and that we cannot use those words to describe this system to our constituents. But again, so rather than reforming government, what we are doing is we are growing government. We are growing this bureaucracy in health care. We are also growing this bureaucracy in the energy area. So we are seeing a massive expansion of the role of government and an erosion of freedom for American citizens today. The model is cut taxes, reform government, and freeze spending. Whether you are in the state of Michigan and perhaps many other states around the country, or you are in Washington, D.C., if you're asking where are the jobs and why is there not any economic recovery, the answer becomes fairly clear. We've got the wrong model in place, because rather than cutting taxes, we are going to be increasing taxes, whether it's in cap and trade, whether it's in health care, or whether it's allowing many of the tax cuts that were implemented in the previous administration to allow them to expire. We are going to grow taxes. Rather than reforming government, we are going to grow government. And rather than freezing spending, we are going to increase spending. We're going in exactly the wrong direction for economic growth. The model that you're seeing here in Washington, and I remember a couple of months after the election, President-elect Obama was sitting at a conference in Chicago and had a lot of his economic advisors and a lot of his future cabinet with him, and they were talking about what to do with the economy. And I saw that the governor of Michigan was sitting next to the president. And I thought part of the reason for this would be for the president to learn from our governor what some of the things that we had tried in Michigan that clearly hadn't worked, that increasing taxes, that had not grown Michigan's economy, that had been detrimental to our economy, that more regulations and more bureaucracy had been detrimental to our economy, that increasing the size and the scope of Michigan's government had been bad for our economy and bad for job creation, that, the president would be able to understand that and say maybe we ought to take a different look at what we're going to be doing in Washington. But he has followed the same formula of increasing taxes, forgetting to reform government, and increasing spending. And each of these cases, as we move through that direction, as we move down that path, When we grow taxes, who gets more control of America's future and who loses freedom? When we grow taxes, it means that America's families, America's individuals, and America's businesses, they lose control and they lose freedom. When we grow government, when we put this system between you and your doctor, who gets control and who loses freedom? This system guarantees that control moves to the federal government. Who loses freedom? America's families, America's individuals, and America's businesses. So when we grow taxes, who loses freedom? The American people do. When we grow government, who loses freedom and who gains control? America's people lose freedom. The government gains control. When we grow spending, who gets control? The federal government. Who loses freedom? The American people. Which means that a lot of the debate now in Washington, D.C. is about control and it is about freedom. Let me give you a couple of examples. You know, this week the president announced a new education program. $4 billion, one more education program. We counted all the education programs that were out there a few years ago, and we came up with a number of 659 different education programs. And now we've got one more. And, you know, there's parts of this education bill that I agree with the themes and the objectives. It says, you know, we got to open up our education system to more K through 12 system, to more charter schools. It's kind of like, yes, I like charter schools. I think they work. But then, you know, this is now the federal government saying, if you want a piece of the action, if you want some of these $4 billion, these are the things that you're going to have to do to compete for those $4 billion. Well, you know what? Charter schools may be appropriate for Michigan, but they may not be appropriate for another state. So why is the federal government saying that charter schools, that's now the way it's going to be nationally, and we're going to take your money to incent you to do things that the federal government wants you to do? Who loses control and who loses freedom? The federal government gets control using your money to bribe you to do things they want you to do that may or may not be appropriate for your state or your community. Who loses control? Local schools, local families, and the states. Of course, the most massive expansion and the best example of this in education is the passage of No Child Left Behind in 2001. The goal is a goal that I think every American agrees with. No child left behind. Every child is a unique gift to us, and it's our responsibility, you know, and as a parent, it's my responsibility to try to do everything that I can to raise up that child and to make sure that that child is given the background, the values, and the education necessary that will enable them to have a fruitful and productive life. I want that responsibility as a parent. I want the freedom to raise my child. What does No Child Left Behind do? No Child Left Behind says we're going to move responsibility for K through 12 education. We're not going to move it from a parent and a family to the local school board to the state. It says, man, we're going to grab K through 12 education and we are going to move it not only from the local community, we're going to move it all the way from there, we're going to move it all the way to the Department of Education. Who gets control? Who now has control of your local schools? We send to your local school about 10 to 12, maybe 15% of the money that they spend every year. The majority of that money is raised at the state or the local level. But ask your teachers and ask your superintendents as to who is controlling what is going on in your local school. And they'll